Welcome everyone to our archive hour, and this week we are listening to Catherine Ponder, a name that is probably familiar to all of you, I suspect. A woman who really became very prominent in Unity over the years, published lots of books. And in fact, when I first came to Unity in Boyne Hill in 10, 15 years ago, I think Catherine Ponder was extremely popular at that time. There are lots of books being sold. We often got people ringing us up asking for Catherine Ponder books. She's known most of all for her prosperity thinking ideas. But she obviously talked about other things as well, and other things related into that prosperity teaching that she was doing. Before that, I'm keeping David in the proceedings, David Davenport in the proceedings, and I've managed to discover a daily word reading on prosperity that David read, and I don't know quite when. I know it was in April, but I don't know which April it was. And it's actually not complete. The tape ends just before the finish of the reflection, but most of the reflection is on it. So we'll have David giving us a little reflection on prosperity, and then we'll have Catherine Ponder's talk. She gave several talks, I think, if I'm right, at the conference. This, I think, is the first one. Well, I think it's pretty certain it is, because of the way she launches into it. And in it, it's a full hour, which we won't listen to. We'll listen to about 25 minutes of it, and then I'll put the rest of it up online for you to listen to. She talks early on, particularly the section that we're going to listen to, about how she came to Unity and how the Unity experience unfolded for her. And then, having done that, she begins to talk about her ideas, her prosperity ideas, and starts to discuss that. And I think when you get to listen to the whole hour, you will find a lot more about the prosperity side of things in the rest of the hour. The other thing to say about it, the quality is pretty good, although she has a strong Southern accent. Nancy will correct me if I got it all wrong, but I think it's a strong accent, which is actually really nice to listen to. It's very pleasant to listen to this. It's like you've walked into a Western movie. You really feel you're on the prairies when you're listening to her. At least that's how I respond to it. So there we are. That's going to be how we arrange our hour today. And at the end of the hour, I've got a nice cheery little hymn for us in the spirit of prosperous living. I've got a nice cheery hymn for us to close with. So that's the way it's going to be for this next hour. Here we go.
This is the Daily Word for Thursday, April the 28th. I am richly blessed. Thank you, God. Every day, every moment, every hour, free gifts from God are showered upon us in abundance. We pause for a few moments today to consider the magnitude of our blessings and to realize how all-encompassing is God's good, to give thanks for all that is lovely, inspiring, and enjoyable in our lives. We thank you, God, for our health, for your wondrous life flowing in and through us. Thank you, God, for the loving and lovely people in our lives, family, friends, co-workers, and pets. All these contribute to our happiness and well-being, and we appreciate them anew. Thank you, God, for the beautiful world in which we live, especially at this season of the year when we are reminded of nature's lavish gifts.
Here we are. So we're slightly missing on the final biblical quotation, but I think we have most of that little reflection. David had a wonderful way of reading the Daily Word, and then Ken Bradley took over in the through the 90s and then into the noughties, and he has a lovely delivery as well. So yes, the audio daily word is a powerful tradition. Unfortunately, it's declined because people have not been so interested nowadays. And of course, with the digital daily word, you can get it all very easily from your smartphone. So what we can do is not as we can't really compete with that. Anyway, that sets the mood. Blessings, a sense of our blessings, and the blessings in the world around us. And here now is Catherine Ponder coming to the rostrum of the conference. Here she is.
Friends, it certainly is my pleasure to be here with you tonight. And especially since this is Unity's first World Conference. And especially since the theme is oneness. One family, one spirit, one world. I would particularly like to thank Reverend Ron Tyson, who personally invited me through my son to participate in this particular First World Unity Conference. As some of you know, Reverend Ron Tyson is in charge of the Department of World Outreach at Unity Village. And he and I have had the pleasure of working together on worldwide matters in connection with Unity for the last several years. And so thank you, Ron, for making it possible for me to be here, my son and our Karen to be here with us from Palm Springs, California tonight. Now, friends, I love this idea of oneness, which we all are experiencing just by being here in this room tonight together. But I have a very special feeling about this idea of oneness. In fact, when I saw the brochure for this conference, I gasped. When I saw the idea, one family, one world, one spirit. And the reason I gasped was because in 1951, I went to Unity Village, Missouri, USA, Unity's world headquarters, for the very first time. And I went there to find out about this thing called Unity. I wanted to know what it was all about. I had been reading the Unity publications for some time. I had been writing to Silent Unity, making them feel rather needed for some time by asking for their prayer support over the years. But the Unity message of practical Christianity just sounded too good to be true to me compared to what I had been taught in the past. And so in the fall of 1951, I decided to check it all out in person for myself, to see what Unity School, the Unity message, and Silent Unity were really all about. Well, I was fascinated. I was delighted with all that I found there. The people, the teaching, the surroundings were beautiful. They were inspiring. They were uplifting. Furthermore, the theme of that Unity retreat was oneness. Oneness. Every speaker at that retreat talked about oneness from some standpoint. Now, I have to admit to you that as much as I liked the speakers and the teaching and the surroundings, I thought to myself, what's the big deal about this oneness business? What's all the shouting about? I wasn't sure at that point in my growth and understanding that I got this oneness business at all. In fact, when I later began going to Unity Village on a yearly basis, I always got such an uplift that when I got home, and things did not always go as well as I thought they should, I would think to myself, I just need to get back out to Unity Village, because I know that God is at Unity Village and He can straighten all of this out. Well, it took me a long time to realize that God was, as I kept saying at Unity Village, that God really was omnipresent, which meant that He was present with me in my workaday world, right where I was. Oneness. Now, I rejoice in the 1990s because wherever I go, I see oneness all about me. Wherever I lecture, north, south, east, west, I see people from various countries and backgrounds and cultures all coming together to live, to work, to study, to grow side by side. It is the United Nations in action, and that's what we have right here represented tonight with all of you. Now, of course, this idea of oneness, this teaching of oneness, is not new. All great religions and philosophies have known about oneness. And we know basically what the teaching is. The teaching of oneness is just what it sounds like, that we're all one, whether we meant to be or not. We're all one whether we want to be or not. We're all one, period. A Daily Word lesson recently put it beautifully when it talked about us as all being members of the family of God, and then it talked about us as being members of the family of faith, and I like that. And so this oneness idea is a powerful one for this entire conference. And as David Davenport has already said, you will be hearing about oneness from various people, getting various perspectives. But at our core, we're all one. Now you may say, well, why is this teaching of oneness so important? Because we're all God's children. This makes us, now I hesitate to use this word, but I'm going to do it anyway. I prayed about it, and God told me it was all right. We're all God's children. This makes us spiritual kinfolks. The word kinfolks was the one I had to pray about, because I don't know how some of you may feel about some of your kinfolks. But then maybe that's the reason we're here together, huh? Now, what it really means, friends, is that this idea of oneness is that when we help another person, we help ourselves. And when we hurt another person, we hurt ourselves. Sooner or later, it all catches up with us through the law of mind action. And our chickens come home to roost as results in our own lives. Now, it's confession time for me. And those of you who have read my books know I tend to do this. And my confession is this to you. The day that I was working on these notes about oneness, I heard from some people who had, I felt, been unkind and hurtful to me in the past. Yet in their letter, they were acting as though nothing was wrong, that nothing had ever happened, and that we were still the best of friends. Now, my first human reaction, human reaction, was I wanted to respond by being hurtful to them, as I felt they had been hurtful to me. I wanted to let them have it. I wanted to call them everything but what they really were, spiritual beings. I wanted to share a few choice words with them. And I have to admit to you that I spent the day trying to frame in my mind mentally just how I was going to put those few choice words. Then, toward the end of the day, an interesting thing happened to me. I hurt myself physically. Nothing serious, just some bruises and scratches, but enough to make me feel uncomfortable and enough to get my attention. And I thought, from a metaphysical standpoint, now what's all this about? What have I done to bring this home? It was then that I began to remember my own words about oneness. When we hurt another, we hurt ourselves. Sooner or later, it all catches up with us through the law of mind action. And our chickens come home to roost as results in our own lives. I realized that I had to eat my words by not being hurtful, but by being non-resistant toward those people, to just silently bless them and release them with love, and not to retaliate. So much for my instant lesson in oneness. I admit it. You know, sometimes people say, well, obviously, Catherine Ponder is no saint to tell a story like that and to admit what some of her true feelings had been for a while. No, I certainly am not a saint, and I'm not working on sainthood, and I'll tell you why. Most of you have heard that saying, and I believe it. Saints are all right in heaven, but they're hell on earth. All right, the good news, friends, is that when we become uplifted through our inspirational studies, we help to uplift the consciousness of all mankind and of other people around us. And of course, this is what the unity movement has been doing for over 100 years. And now, in the 1990s, as we move expectantly and happily toward the 21st century, we are seeing all of the accumulated good results of unity's efforts of the past century, not just for unity, but for people everywhere, as David Davenport mentioned earlier. For instance, I received a delightful letter recently from a businessman in Africa who blatantly admitted to me that he had been getting and reading his twin brother's mail. I guess he thought that since he was a twin, that gave him certain privileges and rights, and that the laws of privacy just simply did not apply to him. Regardless, he'd been having a great time sneaking around, reading his brother's mail, twin brother's mail. Now, in that mail, he found some monthly mailing pieces from my unity work, and he liked them. And this surprised him because he had always considered himself an atheist, an agnostic, a non-believer, the works. But after reading our mailing describing God as a God of love, he wrote me and said, I did not believe in God because I did not know there was that kind of a God of love. And then he asked, would you please send me my own monthly mailings and some of your books? And I wrote him back that we'd be glad to, but on one condition, that he stopped reading his twin brother's mail, because he was going to start getting his own mail, which would be filled with good news for him. Now, some of us have a surprise sometimes when we are trying to achieve good things in the world. And that surprise can be that sometimes we get criticized for our good works by people who probably simply just do not understand what we're all about. For instance, the unity movement, and those of us connected with it, have sometimes been described as teaching a me-first philosophy. How to heal me, how to prosper me, how to get my prayers answered. Well, unity is not a me-first philosophy. No way. It is a philosophy of oneness that simply has its priorities straight. And you say, well, what are those straight priorities? Just this. How can you help your neighbor if you are hungry or sick or fighting one problem after another? We all know that it was the master teacher himself who said, by their fruits you shall know them. And so we have to personally become uplifted first in order to uplift other people. There's some more of that oneness. Now, a new, well-meaning, beautiful lady minister once said to me, I do not teach prosperity to my people because I have not demonstrated it yet in my own life. And I don't think that I should teach what I have not demonstrated. And I said to her, my dear, you have it backwards. You teach what you want to learn. You teach what you want to demonstrate. Because you cannot demonstrate what you do not know. There must be an inworking before there can be an outworking. And so first, I'm glad to be here tonight because of our theme of oneness. The very first thing I heard about at Unity Village more than 40 years ago. And now the whole world is trying to catch up with unity. And this oneness idea is all the rage. I find that delightful. I find it most appropriate. Second, I'm also glad to be here tonight to talk about the principles of prosperity, which I learned through my study of unity. I found out about unity's prosperity teaching and just how wonderful and how powerful it really is when I served in my first ministry in another city named Birmingham, Alabama, USA. It has sometimes been called the sister city of Birmingham, UK. Now, in my first ministry there in Birmingham, Alabama, we had a businessman who used to attend retreats at Unity Village every year, just as I had done earlier. And I said to him, why do you keep going back to Unity retreats every year? And he said, because they remind me there, year after year, of one great truth that I need to hear repeatedly. He said at every retreat they always say the same thing. I am a spiritual being living in a spiritual universe governed by spiritual law. He said that one great idea helps to get me through my day every day. All right, there's some more of that oneness. Spiritual being, spiritual universe, spiritual law. Now, many of you know the story of how in 1958, when one of the worst recessions ever hit the United States, some business people in our Unity Church in Birmingham, Alabama, came to me and said, "Doesn't Unity teach the spiritual principles of prosperity?" And rather hesitantly, I said yes. They said, "Well, if we ever needed a prosperity class, we need it now." I hesitated to try to teach a prosperity class because I had never attended a prosperity class when I was going through the Unity training school. I just never got there at the right time. And so I wasn't sure how to proceed. But the people were desperate. There were bread lines, there was unemployment, and the government had declared that beautiful city a disaster area. So I decided to take the strongest thing I could find on the subject of prosperity and teach it, which was Charles Fillmore's book entitled Prosperity. And the prosperity formula that we used at that first prosperity class from the writings of Mr. Fillmore were very simple, and they're just as applicable today as they were then. This was our theme: turn the great energy of your thinking upon ideas of plenty, and you will have plenty, regardless of what people about you are doing or saying. Now, at that particular point, that sounded like a big order for us, but we decided to try it. When the business people, the professional people, the retired people, the homemakers, and even some students started attending that prosperity class, they were filled with gloom and doom, as was the entire area. We began that class in cold, dreary winter weather. Yet gradually, I watched those people come to life and blossom forth as they quietly began to get results from Mr. Fillmore's book and from that philosophy of turning the great energy of their thinking upon ideas of plenty, knowing that they could have plenty regardless of what other people were doing or saying. The results amazed us all. We did not know what to expect. There were pay raises right away in the midst of the recession. There were promotions. There were better jobs. There were physical healings. There were marriages that were reconciled. One lady who had been wedded for 20 years even remarried. The happy results just seemed endless. It was then that that group of people asked me to begin writing about prosperity in order to tell their story to the world. And so I began by writing a short little article for Good Business magazine, a Unity publication then in print. And that article was prophetically entitled, "Your Success is Unlimited." It took me about a half an hour to turn out that article, which turned out to be one of the most prosperous half hours of my life, because little did I know what would follow. What did follow was that when the article appeared in Good Business magazine, the reader reaction was so great that its editor, Mr. Jim Decker, asked me to continue writing on the subject of prosperity. And I have obediently followed his instructions ever since. Now, that was 1959. And here it is, 1995, and I'm still at it, 34 years later. And so, friends, it was a unity book. First, Mr. Fillmore's book. And then it was a unity editor that launched me as a prosperity writer and teacher. And it was unity readers from around the world who have cheered me on and on for almost 4 decades with no end in sight. Now, you may say, well, why have you written so much about prosperity? Because that is what people the world over have demanded. Although I have written books on prayer and healing and love and Bible interpretation, it is the spiritual teachings on prosperity that people seem to want and need the most, at least from me.
I'm going to stop it there. It sort of seems a good point to just break off there. She's just made that great claim about both the power of prosperity thinking and this kind of momentous event in her life which set her on this amazing journey, and how she was supported by the enthusiasm of those people around her. So it's a kind of key moment in her life, I suppose, right in the middle of that depression in America. And I suppose that might have something to do with it, the kind of synchronicity between her getting hold of the Fillmore ideas and putting them together in an article at a time when people were hungering for a different way of thinking, at a time of great need and hardship. But over to you. Anybody wanted to launch in and say anything about?
Yeah, I had the pleasure of traveling up to Connie Basie Fillmore's suite in the hotel in the lift. I didn't know who she was when she first got in. And the first thing that struck me about her was how shrewd she is. She scanned me from head to toe and back down again in a split second. You could feel the energy. She was traveling in the lift with a young man in a white suit with a fedora hat, and a young lady, I think, who was Spanish with long hair. I didn't know whether they were related, but I thought they were her aides, actually. But the very presence of the woman, oozed prosperity and ease, and definitely a very shrewd lady, and but very sincere. And she wouldn't suffer fools gladly. Very sincere in what she said and what she does. But I think Catherine is still doing stuff on Facebook. There's still daily stuff belonging to her coming up on Facebook.
Really?
She must be well into her 90s, the latter half of 90s, I'm sure.
Do you have memories of listening to her, or did you meet her during those days?
I didn't meet her. I remember one talk. I mean, I don't remember the talk, but I remember going to the talk, listening to the talk. I was taken by her accent. I was taken by her poise as she spoke, her presence, and I was taken by her hair. Her hair was like, it was like, well, it was almost like when she moved, it wouldn't move with her, but it was the poise and the way she was speaking when she was speaking. I've got her Prospering Power of Love books, and I do 12 power. I take 12 powers through the year, and a lot of the affirmations I use are affirmations from her books. I don't have much more of a memory than that, though, but I would say that I've been to Unity Village quite a few times. many times, just over 24 hours, I was saying to someone, come with me to Unity Village, because I want you to experience this. And nobody really experienced it. But for me, it was like going to Mecca. It was like, that's where the energy was. Of course, it's everywhere, but for me, that's where the energy was. That is where all the people I read about, all the people I read, all the people that have inspired me have at some point come through Unity Village. So their energy is there. And that's what I feel like I'm picking up on whenever I go there. Despite the changes, recent changes, there are still ways to tap into that energy, which I'm very pleased about.
I remember her talks very clearly, particularly one sentence that she said, whatever we did and whatever we forgot, never believe a doctor who gives you bad news. Always believe doctors who give you good news. And from that day on, John and I followed that to the letter with great success. Yes. And at the end of the conference, she gave every single person copies of her book.
Really? I have to make a confession here. Catherine Ponder is not on my list of people that I love in Unity. I enjoy listening to her. I mean, and I enjoy listening to your descriptions of her, and I know she's a person of great influence in Unity. I'm not trying to belittle her in that way, but for me, I've always rankled that it feels rather simplistic and rather mechanistic to my way of thinking, particularly this idea that if you keep, it's like every day and every way my life is getting better and better. It's that whole thing of sort of being determined that things are going to be nice and they'll be nice. And it's a part of Unity I struggle with, I have to say. And because she's known for this kind of prosperity thinking, I have never read any of her books, so you can regard my remarks as pure prejudice.
Yes, I mean, I wonder whether sometimes, the problem we have with somebody else is perhaps cultural. I've listened to a lot of American speakers and benefited from them in the sort of personal development kind of spiritual, broadly speaking, field. And, the first one that sort of set me on a journey, one of the first people was a man called Jack Canfield, and a friend who was working as a staff trainer gave me a bootleg copy of cassettes that the department was sharing with staff. And I have to say, I struggled to listen to his accent, and it was a real torment. Not that, being English, we could possibly be prejudiced, of course, but I did struggle. But persevered because I felt there was something of value there, and eventually became quite an advocate for other people listening to him. But yes, I think sometimes with the sort of positive, affirmative approach to a lot of these ideas, it seems it's though it's easier for Americans to grasp because they seem to come from a background of you're allowed to do that, whereas the English background is kind of more know your place. Perhaps, you're more, I wouldn't have thought we lived in a class society, but I come around to understanding we still do deep down.
That's a really interesting point, that distinction between America and UK, because there's a lot of truth in that, isn't there? I mean, America, the land of dreams and promises, and you think of the wagon trains, heading west to the land of milk and honey, all the gold that they're going to find, and there is that whole thing about positivity.
You make your own life.
Yes, exactly. Whereas Europe and UK, it's like we're history, and we're no, it's never worked in the past. How could it possibly work in the future? That sort of mentality.
There's this thing in the Christian churches of sins of omission and sins of commission. And when we came across Emmett Fox, one of the little things that we listened to was he was talking about a lady who'd had a problem. She'd set up a centre, and the centre had been undermined by some third party. And Emmett Fox's phrase was, "You are the person that undermined the centre." And we kind of tussled with this because it sounded quite damning, quite critical. And I was saying, and Jeff and I were saying to each other, well, you know, you don't sit there and sort of imagine people doing you down. However, what we probably fail to do is to imagine the positive outcome. And I think this is where perhaps the cultural, to bring it back to the cultural difference, that I think my sort of very superficial impression of America is that there is a sort of a cultural idea that you can make your own life.
This is a really interesting area. I think there's Nancy is an American. What do you?
I'm not an American. Do I have to show you my nationality certificate? Come on.
I love it. I love it. I love it.
Well, I think there's two kinds of exceptionalism. There's the American exceptionalism, who think they're the best of everything else. And then there's the British exceptionalism, where the thinking is sort of, you know, it's exceptionally bad, you know, or exceptionally unlikely, or exceptionally whatever. I mean, I remember first coming here, hearing people talk about the difference between the North and the South. And I thought, it's the whole one country. There's no difference. I've learned over the last, say, 10 or 12 years, there is a big difference. There is a difference. And living in the North, I'm very partial, and, you know, my bias is for the North. And
quite right.
It's fascinating to me to see all this going on. But what you said, Rita, about sort of public school and that sort of thing, there's that exceptionalism there of, you know, we're entitled to the better things of life because of what we've been through.
I am now going to move us along to a very positive hymn, which I hope you'll enjoy. I'm sure you will enjoy it. Here we go.
See if you can do better with this one, please. Sing well.
I'll slow down.
Let's be what we're made to be. Isn't this our destiny? Let's get started out today, upward on our way. Let's be what we really are. Seek and find our inner star. Let's go forward in the light. Faces shining bright. Stars of dawn, unlimited are we. Let us prove the truth that sets us free. Let's accept our highest good, knowing we're in brotherhood. Let's go good in all we see. Let's don't quit, let's be. Well, that was much better. So we are really improving as we go along. But we'll give you 6 out of 10. Yeah, well, you know, it's all up to you. It's all up to you.
There we are. That was Doreen. Most of you knew that. That was Doreen Davenport, David's wife, who became this when David was still alive when that recording was made. They would run the retreats together. David would do all the talks, and Doreen would do a lot of the kind of master of ceremonies at the services and things. Or the master of ceremonies is a completely inappropriate word, but you know what I mean. So that was Doreen singing there sometime in the 90s at St. Anne's. A nice cheery hymn. Very good. Okay, well, lovely to see you all, and see you again soon, I hope.
Okay, thank you.
Thank
Steve.
you.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Everyone.
Bye.
All the very best. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.